Today I'm going to talk about a whole bunch of those things to figure out what's important for you when you're buying your first camera to become a filmmaker. And you're wondering, what camera should I buy? And my advice is, it might not even be a camera. Let me explain. So, say you have a hard time seeing and you go to the eye doctor and say, hey, I'm having a hard time seeing. And he takes his glasses off and hands them to you and goes, here, this will solve your problem. They worked great for me. You wouldn't be very confident in his assessment of your needs. He didn't really listen to anything or ask you any questions about what your specific situation is. He didn't look at your eyes and look at your specific needs. He took the needs of himself. These glasses had worked for him, but it doesn't mean it's good advice for you. So I can answer, I can pick a great camera and say, here, this is perfect for you. But unless I know your specific situation, I can't really recommend a good camera that fits your specific needs. Now, I can't really assess everyone's individual needs for their camera, but what I can do is talk to you about some of the things that you should be looking for when you're buying a camera or any other type of filmmaking equipment that is. Now, it is good to look for advice of people that have been around a while and know what things are important to look for, because when you're new at filmmaking, anything at all, you don't really know what is important and what's not important. So today I'm going to talk about a whole bunch of those things to figure out what's important for you when you're buying your first camera to become a filmmaker. But before we decide on a camera, I need to talk to you about something. All right, how do I put this? So this is what prompted this entire idea. And that is, I gave a piece of advice just generally to everyone, thinking that it was good advice for everyone, and it really wasn't. And one of my viewers called me out on that. And I'm really glad that he did, because that advice was really good advice for some people, but not everyone. So the piece of advice was, if you're new into filmmaking and you want to learn how to become a good filmmaker, and you only have a $1,000 or $2,000 budget, my advice was to spend that money on audio equipment. But first, let me tell you who that is for, and then we'll get into, if you still need to get a camera, then you'll know what is the best for you. But before you decide it's a camera that you need, just listen through on this one. So if you're in a situation where you live near a city or there's a large group of people that are making films and you want to learn how to make your own films, say you want to be a director or some other aspect of filmmaking other than a cinematographer. So you have people around and you're focused on narrative film. So you want to be on a traditional type set where there's a whole bunch of people working together. If that's what you want, my advice is definitely a camera is not your first choice on buying equipment. And the reason for that is equipment changes, cameras change all the time, and everyone has a camera. I went to a meeting one day of a bunch of filmmakers, and there was 12 people there, and there were 26 interchangeable lens cameras available to those 12 people. Only one person had audio equipment. So what that does is, if there's people making films, everyone's first impulse is to get a great camera. If you buy audio equipment, decent quality, like semi-pro or professional audio equipment, that equipment's going to last you the rest of your filmmaking career, most likely. It's not like cameras, they turn over really fast. But if you want to get on sets and you have a shotgun mic and a boom pole and a recorder, you're going to get invited on a lot more sets. And the great thing about doing audio is it's, holding that boom pole and looking at the levels and, doing everything that you need to do audio still allows your brain to be free to think and to observe what's going on. So you get to go to a bunch of sets, do audio so that you know how to do audio when it comes to yours. You know what's important with getting audio. And you get to see how a set works. You get to learn what people are really good to work with in your area. So when you do come around to make your own film, you'll know exactly who you want to work for and who you don't want to work for. So with that out of the way, and it's a camera you need. Like say you want to learn cinematography, then it doesn't make sense to go right into audio equipment unless you already have a camera. It still will get you on sets and you can observe how other cinematographers do their thing. It also, if you're wanting to be into cinematography, maybe not the audio part, maybe consider buying a lighting package. And then have your own C-stands and a basic lighting package. That too will get you on a bunch of sets. But that's probably going to cost you a little bit more money than just your basic lighting or basic sound equipment. Or you just want to get your feet wet and make your own things like more content creation or things like that, then a camera might be a great choice for you. It all kinds of comes down to the decision isn't just black and white. It is more nuanced than that. And you have to be the one to look at the information and decide. So let's get into my recommendations for what things on a camera to look for when you're making that purchase decision for your first filmmaking camera. The first thing that you need to consider is your budget. And by budget, I don't just mean how much money you have right now to drop on a bunch of equipment, but also moving forward. Are you going to only invest what you have now, or are you going to be adding, throwing more money in as time goes on to increase the equipment that you have? It's going to be way different depending on whether you are investing more money later. So say you want to become a YouTuber, you just want to buy a kit that is everything that you need, and you got a couple of $1,000. You can't spend the whole $2,000 on a camera because there's more to it. You need a camera, you need a lens, microphone, batteries, SD cards, lighting, all that stuff adds up. Even the cabling and SD cards, you're probably going to need more SD cards than you think. You're probably going to need a lot more batteries than you might think. And just don't forget those little pieces, the little connectors and all that other little stuff, camera bag, tripod. If you're going to spend your $2,000 on everything, then you're not going to buy a $2,000 camera. You're probably going to be looking for something that's half of your budget or even less. Probably less. If you're going to be adding equipment as you go on and increase what it is that you have available to you, then you can make different choices. You can buy some better equipment and get a cheaper camera. Like say, if you're new into this and you know that you're not going to be able to get every bit out of a really expensive camera because you don't know how to operate it that well yet because you're new to filmmaking. So don't go and buy the biggest, most expensive camera you can. You're not going to be able to utilize all the awesomeness that camera has to offer. You're better off starting with a camera that's easier on your budget that you can learn on and learn the most that you can get out of that cheaper camera before you start dropping money on a more expensive camera, because cameras change really rapidly. You can buy one expensive camera And as time goes on, that camera is going to be worth less, and it's going to be a little bit behind in what is new. But if you buy a cheaper camera, you're not going to be losing much on that. And then you can upgrade to a better camera as time goes on, and you're not going to be spending that much more for the two different cameras. Now, the camera you start with can end up being your B camera. It's always nice to have a backup. So that's a good way to start off, is to not get that big, expensive, awesome camera, because you're really not going to be able to utilize all of its awesomeness. Oh, and one more thing. Don't run out and buy a whole bunch of crap you don't need because you think you need it to look like a filmmaker. Don't buy stuff to look the part. Buy stuff that solves very specific problems. Yes, sometimes I do need all this crap, but to be honest, 98% of the time, this stuff stays at home. Man, we have a lot to cover here. So I'm not going to be able to go into depth on everything. So if there's something that you have a question about and you can't find the answer, hold on. If there is something specific that you want more information on or isn't clear, please leave a comment and I will try to clear that up as quickly as possible. One of the first things that you need to decide about your camera is whether you're going to get a camera that has a lens permanently mounted on it or one that has interchangeable lenses. Now, interchangeable lenses open up a lot of possibilities, but also comes with a larger package. So if you're really like you're a travel vlogger or something and you need something just really small, go with something that's one of the little point and shoot style cameras. They'll do a great job. If not, if you have the capability of getting a camera that has interchangeable lenses, then I would highly recommend that. Now there is an issue here when you start to move into an interchangeable lens camera, and that is deciding what brand you kind of want to stick with for a while. Because if you're buying lenses, you don't want to buy a lens and then you upgrade your camera and now you have to sell all your lenses and buy different lenses for a different camera. So one of the main things to really decide if you're going with an interchangeable lens camera is what camera mount or what type of sensor to flange distance does the camera have. So if you look at where the sensor's at on the camera, and where the lens mounts, like the lens mount on there, the distance between the flange that your lens mounts to your sensor is going to have a huge effect on how many lenses you can adapt to that camera. For instance, Canon cameras, Nikon cameras, they're single lens reflex, so they need room in there for a mirror, and their sensor to flange distance is a lot bigger than on a mirrorless camera because they need that mirror space in there. Well, the problem with that is it's good with the lenses, but when you go to adapt the lenses that you have or you've collected, you're really restricted to what you can put those lenses on. Now, with the mirrorless camera, you have that really shallow distance between the sensor and the flange. So you can put a lot of vintage lenses on there. So if you want to save some money on glass, I really like the look of vintage lenses. And when I'm shooting narrative type stuff, I almost exclusively use vintage lenses. And if I'm doing B-roll type stuff, I like to use vintage lenses. For stuff like this, where I'm looking for autofocus and I'm moving around a lot, the vintage lenses don't work great for me, so I like to have a native lens that's going to focus really well. Now, one of the big pieces is having manual control over your camera. Okay, so ISO, shutter speed, aperture, frame rate. So frame rate 24p progressive, so it shoots an entire image 24 times a second. That's kind of the standard cinematography, cinematic looking frame rate. Now, if you want to do slow-mo type stuff, like some Peter McKinnon style B-roll, you're going to want a higher frame rate. So we're going to jump from our 24 to at least 60. But if 60, getting up into that 250 frames a second range is some really cool slow-mo in there. So in that range, 60 is kind of on the lower end for that B-roll type stuff. But if you're into that kind of slow-mo B-roll type thing, then you might want to have something with higher frame rates. Picture profiles. You want to be able to control your picture profile and how flat you shoot the image so you can get the most out of the sensor that you have. If it's already making those choices for you for color and everything, then you're not going to have a lot of room to wiggle within the bit rate that you've selected to get the best image out of there. You want to try to shoot flat or flatter. It doesn't mean that you want to shoot as flat as the camera will go. You want to learn what your camera needs. So you want to be able to control that, and so you can get the most out of that camera. Your bit rate is basically how much information you're collecting and putting on your card. And the higher that bit rate, the more information you have. And the more information normally translates into the more you can tweak your image in post. If you have a really low bit rate, then you're not going to have a whole lot of wiggle room before your image starts to fall apart. So that a higher bit rate is something to really look towards needing. It's more important for filmmakers are going to be doing a lot of color grading than people that are just going to have fast turnaround. So if you're a YouTuber just doing a quick turnaround type thing, you might not need huge bit rates compared to somebody that's making a short film or that's doing really cinematic looking sequences. Oh man, now this one's huge especially for content creators, a little bit less for the narrative people, and that is the inputs that you have for audio. If you are a YouTuber, somebody that's doing quick turnaround type, you're producing a lot of content, you want your audio to be very simple. So you want an input like a 3.5 millimeter mini jack so you can plug a microphone into it. Not all these are the same. Some cameras Sony cameras got pretty good preamps, and Panasonic's got pretty good preamps. The Canon cameras, from my experience, have had pretty poor quality preamps. I just don't think they want to focus on the video side of things. Maybe it's getting better. So your preamps are important, not just your having a plug there. Also, having a headphone jack is nice. It's not a deal breaker for me though. It would be nice to verify that the sound is of the quality that you're looking for. But let's face it, if you're YouTubing, you're running around vlogging, you're doing travel stuff, chances are you're not really going to have the time to verify every single time that you have your audio levels set properly. You want something where you can visually verify your audio levels on meters on the camera, but you're not going to be able to wear headphones and plug it in. It's just look awkward. Now, if you're doing really small budget filmmaking and you don't have enough for a bunch of audio equipment, having that headphone jack becomes a little bit more important. If you're doing narrative stuff, it's really not that important to have audio inputs. I like to have them because I like to put a microphone on top so I can get the same audio as the boom operator is, and that just allows me to sync the audio and video up, and it gives me a little bit of a backup You know, 99.9 times we're not going to be using the mic that's on the camera. So for HDMI and SDI, there's a few things that you want to know for your camera. If you're a documentary guy, narrative girl, and you're going to want some sort of method to get the image out of your camera into an external recorder or to a monitor that somebody can watch. You want to know if you can still use the LCD on the back of your camera while you're using the SDI. Can you get clean video out? In other words, can you get video out that doesn't have all the like information about shutter speed and all the other stuff that's on your screen? You want to be able to look at that while you're operating the camera, plus get an HDMI or SDI line out to go to an external recorder or something like that. So in-body stabilization is something that I never thought I needed. I use a lot of like equipment, dollies and jibs and all that kind of fancy schmancy stuff when I'm shooting a film. And I figured I don't need in-body stabilization. I'm stabilizing the camera properly, blah, 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 old school, like old dude, right? Oh my gosh, now that I have this G85 and I see the capability of in-body stabilization with a vintage lens, oh man, what have I been living without? I would highly recommend checking out some cameras with in-body stabilization. It's pretty phenomenal how what things you can get away with, what kind of like motion you can get away with handheld, that if you really like pay attention to what you're doing and like lock your body in and move with your core, you can really get some really cool shots without bringing a whole bunch of equipment around. And let's face it, today in this marketplace, we need to move fast. We need to like get the shot and get to the next shot. So that is highly recommended if you're capable of affording a camera that has decent quality in-body stabilization. Resolution, oh man. I don't feel like you need something beyond 1080 at this point. It is nice to have 4K so you can punch in. I don't really think 4K is quite there yet as far as if you're watching stuff on YouTube, people don't really care that much. I've had 1080p images projected on the big screen and they look pretty darn good. If you can afford 4K, like don't like think that is a must. I think 1080, if you can get a really inexpensive camera that only shoots 1080, it's not a deal breaker. I think it's still a really good place to start. You're going to spend a lot less on hard drives and all the processing power you're going to need to edit your films. Don't think that 4K is necessary today. It might be a little more important in a few years, but probably in a few years you're going to be wanting a new camera anyway. And the 4K cameras in a couple of years are going to be way cheaper than they are today. Battery life. Batteries don't last very long. Some of the older Sony cameras had horrible battery life. Their newer ones, they've stepped it up. Panasonic, fantastic battery life. Canons are decent. Just keep in mind that you're going to need way more batteries than you probably think, but it's much handier to have to not run out of batteries like right in the middle of a shot. If you're doing narrative stuff, it's not that big a deal because you're yelling cut and then you have a little bit of time. If you have access with your rig that you can change batteries quickly, that tends to not be that big a deal. If you're doing documentary style stuff, it's a huge deal. You don't want to be changing batteries right when the person's opening up and really expressing themselves. That's terrible. So a really big piece of choosing the camera is your sensor size. Now, my personal favorite size sensor is APS-C, and that surprises a lot of people. a lot of people like the full frame because they can get that really shallow, buttery image, and they have great like low light capability. Yes, and yes, they do have that. I still like the look of that middle road, that more classic, like 35 millimeter film cameras are shooting with the film going this way. APS-C, like Super 35, that is using the long side of the image along the width of the film. APS-C is what 35 millimeter motion picture film is. Full frame is based on photography. The film goes this way through the camera, and the narrow part of the film is the height of the image. So a full frame camera, they do get great images. I just think it's overused. Like back in, what was it, the late 80s, early 90s, when people first started getting these transition generators that only like big people could use before that. Suddenly everybody was using all these like page turns and crazy transitions everywhere in the videos. It was awful. It's just super terrible. They're doing it because they finally could, and not because it made sense for the work that they were doing. And I kind of think that's where we're at right now with cinematography on the web. Everybody finally has these cameras that can produce these really shallow depth of field images, and I think it's just overdone, and people they're just doing it as shallow as possible, and they're not really thinking about how the image would improve if they were a little bit less shallow, if they shot it a different way. They're just generically going, I have to shoot this as shallow as possible because that is what cinematic images look like, and that's just not true. Watch a bunch of movies, they don't shoot everything just on the edge. So that's my little rant on that thing. A few other things that you're going to want to look at in your camera is the ergonomics of it. Does it feel good in your hand? Like the G85 is okay in my hand. I tend to bump buttons a little bit on that camera, but I really like the camera. The GH5, I really like the feel of that. I like the feel of the Sony A7 cameras, but you need to like go out and feel the camera that you're looking at and see if it fits you ergonomically. You might not even like a DSLR style like camera. Maybe you like the C300 or something like that. Some more cinema oriented camera works better with the way you're working. Just like think about how you're going to work and how that camera fits within that process. Now, memory card types, nowadays SD cards are pretty much ubiquitous with film or with cameras until you get in these really like red, and then you start getting into some proprietary ways to hold the images, because you need to like just pump so much data in. The SD cards just aren't fast enough to do that. Now, when you're shooting 4K at higher resolutions, you're going to need a really fast SD card. So keep that in mind when you're thinking your budget again, that you're going to need fast SD cards. You're not cheap ones. And you're also going to need some like bigger SD cards, because you're going to like go through that 32 and 64 gigs pretty darn fast. Now, there are a few issues with some cameras that are bigger problems for some people and less for others, like rolling shutter. My A6300, I really like the images I get out of that camera. But the rolling shutter on it is awful. It's just really bad. And usually the larger the sensor, the more susceptible to rolling shutter it is. It really has to do with how fast it can like pull that information off. So rolling shutter is like when you have something moving or a train goes by, it does this leany looking thing because the way it's scanning the lines to capture the image, it's not scanning the line on the top and the bottom at the same time. So you can kind of get jello-y kind of action. If you're mounting a camera on a car and it's vibrating a lot, you can get this wobbly like jello effect, and that's caused by the camera vibrating and the rolling shutter. It gives you this wonky like vibrating stuff. If you want more information on how to mount a camera on a vehicle, I have some videos on that too. I'll leave a link somewhere. When it comes right down to it, most of the cameras today are going to get a pretty darn good image. Even the images coming out of my iPhone are pretty phenomenal, even compared to just a few years ago. So most cameras are going to get a really great image. It's really going to come down to the few features that are more important to you, depending on exactly what you're working with as far as budget and what type of filmmaking you want to do. The more versatile you want your camera to be, the more you're probably going to have to pay to get a camera that's going to do all the things that you want. You might also want to consider is how does it fit with all the things that you're doing. Are you going to be taking photos also? Then you might not want a C300. If you're going to primarily be taking photos, then an A7R might be a good camera. It's like really depends on what you want. While I knew that this was going to be kind of a long video, I really wanted to go in depth on each one of the little subjects there. I just knew this video was going to get way too long. If you do have specific questions about anything that I covered, or if you're not sure what it is you're looking for, maybe we can get a hold of each other and like I can learn a little bit about what you need, and I can help you make a good choice on what camera and or other equipment is best for you. That's all I have for you guys today. I love y'all, and I hope to see you in the comments. Bye. What are you still doing here? You know, the video's over.